I certainly hope everybody had a wonderful week. Unfortunately, nobody's so far is on the call live today, and that's totally fine. Of course, I feel incredibly lonely. I do notice that if you have the option, it's always best to get on the call live. It's a lot easier on you, so you don't have to plan on watching it later or rewatching it later. But what I have noticed is that although everybody who gets A's is not always on the calls, the people who consistently show up for these Teams meetings are those people who get A's. I know that some people are going to be having questions. Many people are going to be having questions, and I wanted to point out a couple things this week that will hopefully answer many of them. Sometimes the links that you see at the bottom of images aren't connected. I've tried to make sure that all of them are live and working. If they're not, just copy them and put them into a new search bar and go ahead and run them. Just hit enter, and that should take you to the website. If there is a problem, uh, one student noticed that there was a problem, and I went and double checked all the links and made sure that they were working. If there is an issue, you can also do a search for the same parameters that you see underneath the photo. Like, for example, if it's a photo that shows different kinds of traditional designs, you can do your own search for those same traditional designs and see if that helps. Sometimes, and this is the thing that makes me feel really dumb, I was having a really difficult time. None of the links were working, nothing was working. And I called up help, and I could tell that the person was having a difficult time breathing because they were trying not to let me hear them laughing. And they told me basically to just empty out my browser history and get rid of the cookies, and then it worked just fine. It was rather humiliating on my part, but sometimes that, the simplest solutions are the ones that work. This week's module is about the Renaissance. Excuse me. And this week is also when midterms are due. Now, we do not have a midterm for this class. Our final is really not going to be much of a final. It's actually going to be the two projects that we talked about, the research project that you've been doing a little bit here and there with, as well as a final project where you build something that didn't exist in the Mali Empire but should have. But because midterms are due, what that means is that I'm forced to catch up on grading, which I've done. And if things have not been turned in, I just put a 0 on them. That again, you're not being docked points for turning things in late, because this is an online course, and we talked about that at the beginning. But when you do have a lot of zeros showing up, it's a sign from Canvas that you need to work on those assignments. I know that there's a couple people that are having issues with health-related concerns and other things along those lines. If you feel that you are getting behind to the point where you don't know don't know if you're able to catch up, I would recommend contacting the Office of Accommodations on campus. They are really, really good at finding ways to help you, and they will also contact teachers on your behalf to let them know that you're struggling, and ask the teacher to do what they can to help you. I've worked with several students doing that already, and I am happy to work with the Office of Accommodations. So if you are struggling, please get a hold of them as soon as you possibly can, so that they can send me the required paperwork so we can make that happen. Again, I am going through everything that is due up until now, and if the things have not been turned in, I've just written down please submit for points, and I put a 0 down. I have to do that as a requirement with the university. Again, when you see those zeros, that is not your permanent grade. You can resubmit as many times as you need to. I've had a couple of people who have this semester who have resubmitted a number of times because they didn't get the points that they wanted, either because they didn't understand the assignment or for other reasons. So I am happy to grade whenever you resubmit. That leads me to another couple observations. But one is I've noticed that there are a few people, not very many, who are really excited about the assignment and turn it in, but they don't get very good grades because they haven't read the entire assignment and they don't follow the directions for the assignment. I have also tried very hard to go through and make sure that all the rubrics are up to date, um, and uh, and match the assignment description. Sometimes that means I have to trim down the assignment. Sometimes I have to update the rubric. So if you notice that there's a discrepancy, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I will take care of that as soon as I possibly can. When you go to submit an assignment, don't panic if it's a little bit late or if it's going to be late. Just go through, read the assignment parameters, read the description of the assignment and the directions, and then do the best you can. One thing that I noticed is that every once in a while something will happen, like an assignment, the assignment description will call for 5 of these 15-minute paintings. People will only turn in 3, so you just need to do 2 more. Or on the 2-color painting, it called for folding the paper into 4 areas, and a couple of people just did them into 3. So you don't have to redo the assignment. Just get another area that's equivalent to one of those thirds and paint that, and then resubmit all all of those 4 images at the same time, and then let me know that you resubmitted it so I can take care of it. I have updated all the resubmissions, and like I said, I finished grading everything. So if you have gotten something that you don't think is appropriate, or you have just haven't turned stuff in, if you can turn it in by midnight tonight, then that will count towards the midterm. Otherwise, I have to turn the midterms in, and we'll just update the grading this week. Now, this week's module, we're going to be talking about the Renaissance. One other thing I saw is that there's 2 reflections in the world tour dealing with Africa. One reflection is just on the kente cloth and some of the observations about what may very well be social misuse of something like kente cloth. Sometimes when we appropriate traditions from people, we're using this as an exercise, and we are trying to do this with respect to find our own stories. And I think that is perfectly fine. From the people that I've spoken with, the elders that I've spoken with, the, um, the wisdom keepers, they feel that is perfectly appropriate as well. When it starts becoming inappropriate to um, basically steal people's ideas is when we try to uh, let everybody else feel that they are our ideas or that they belong to us. When we appropriate from other cultures, it is very important to do everything we can to show respect and admiration for those cultures, not to make a public spectacle of ourselves as we appropriate. And I'm really happy that I see on these reflections that people have been writing about the kente cloth. You were able to pick that up right away. I mean, you see how it can be inappropriate to use cultural appropriation for social media bites. And I'm very happy with that. Now, the reason I bring this up is that there are 2 reflections in the Africa module. One is about the entire module, and that deals with what we learned about Africa, the 54 countries, the 14,000 languages, but also the different kinds of art forms that we see. And the other one is specifically about just the kente cloth. So several people turned in another kente cloth essay for the reflection on Africa. And if you want to submit that under the kente cloth, that's perfectly fine. But what I need you to do, and I wrote notes to all those people, is write a reflection that is basically covers your thoughts about the entire module, as well as our team's meeting that you saw too. And then just resubmit it, let me know that you did, and I will correct that grade. This module that we're going to be discussing is on the Renaissance. The Renaissance is a word that means essentially cultural rebirth, and it came at a specific point in history for the Western world that was very important. At that time, many Christians, wherever they found themselves around the world, mostly in Europe, we're talking at this time, or a lot in Europe and the near Middle East, uh, they were getting closer and closer to the year 1500. There has there were very strong promises in the Bible, in the New Testament, that Jesus would return. And first, one of the fueling drives for the Crusades was that it was believed that Christ would come at the millennium. That's when he would return in the year 1000. That did not happen. And so there was a growing fervor that uh, Jesus would come again in the year 1500. That is one of the reasons why Isabel and Ferdinand of Spain were funded by the Pope to transfer that funding to Christopher Columbus and his crews to quote unquote discover the New World. I say that in quotes because there is archaeological evidence to show that the North and South America have been quote unquote visited and or quote unquote discovered by many different cultures over the last several thousand years, with the indigenous peoples having a history of interacting with newcomers over and over again. Some of the more interesting ones is the Irish explorers that came up the Gulf of Mexico, up the Oklahoma River, and left evidence there in about the 3rd or 4th century AD, as well as the um, Smithsonian has in their collection a piece of flint that was carved with Aramaic from the 2nd century that was found in Virginia, that is at least 700 years under at least 700 years layers or worth of layers of dirt, which hints that there were people from the fall of Jerusalem that came to the eastern coast of the U.S. And then there's also in the Great Lakes region, there was so much copper that has been mined um, before 2,500 years ago that there's absolutely no evidence of it ever being used in North America, but ingots of that copper were found in a Phoenician shipwreck that is dated to at least 2,000 years old. So there is evidence for other people coming, but one of the reasons why they funded the New World Expedition was to uh, forcibly convert everybody that they found to prepare the world for the second coming, because they were convinced that the second coming would occur in the year 1500. That's why 1492 was the big year, because they were hoping to get to the Americas, convert everybody that they could, and give those souls up as an offering to um, the second coming. So we have the Crusades um, that were kind of engendered by that. But during the process of the Crusades, so many new technologies were developed for rapid transit. We don't think of that as rapid transit now, but if you can imagine, it would take a lifetime of travel to go from Northern Europe and explore Central Africa. And now um, I flew to Iran in less than 21 hours. And you could go almost anywhere in this world in less than 30 hours, when it would require, like I said, almost a lifetime. But during the Crusades, there were so many new travel technologies developed, and later subsequently, that people could travel relatively quickly and get almost anywhere in the world in a matter of months or less than a year. We also see the birth of well-tended books. Um, People were sharing book knowledge. Our ancestors 1,500 years ago rarely had access to the written word, and because of, well, in large part because of Islam and their and the I want to say importance of literacy in that religion. It has long been regarded as the most literate religion in the last 3,000 years. Uh, the books like the Bible and the works of Plato and Socrates were kept safe during a time when our ancestors were destroying books because most people couldn't read that were from Europe and had no idea what they were doing, what books meant. They were viewed them with quite a bit of suspicion. Now, we'll learn in the next one that part of Islam is a really strong desire to understand the universe through mathematics and geometry. And so a lot of the Europeans that went to North Africa and the Middle East during the Crusades came back to Europe with a lot of this knowledge of geometry and math that they didn't have before, or that they had but had lost in the previous centuries and recovered because Muslims had these really impressive libraries. But also traveling around, it broadens the mental horizon as well. And in order to live with your neighbors, it's a good idea not to be offended by everything that they say. Remember, in a previous Teams meeting, we talked about Plato said that the sign of an educated mind is being able to entertain ideas that aren't your own. A lot of people, as travel expanded in Europe, were able to coexist with their neighbors and understand and appreciate them. But not just that, but start to learn from them and accept knowledge from people that were not like them, and this helped them to really gain a greater understanding of things that we take for granted today, our use of numbers and science, for example. With the birth of construction that happened as the church felt it was getting ready for the second coming, a lot of engineering progressed exponentially, understanding of engineering. And this is when we start seeing huge buildings being generated in Europe and the near Middle East as a result of this new growth of understanding of engineering. This is where we start seeing just expansive, miraculous architecture all over Europe. And we see people's the combination of geometry, math, and engineering in these gigantic domes and huge cathedrals. And so with all this excitement of learning and getting along with people and travel, it generates so that in about 1350, we see the growth of the Renaissance, where we see a cross-pollination of ideas, particularly in Europe, but throughout almost all of Europe, and where these new ways of thinking, you can almost see in the art how a traveling artist would pick up an idea from here and bring it home, or somebody else would travel hundreds of miles with a new idea, and then the artists in the area would start picking that up, or the guilds. So we see a lot of that going on. Now, most people even though the Muslim faith brought about a lot of literacy, in the Christian faith, there wasn't so much literacy. Books were not viewed with as much suspicion as they had been 500 years before, but there's still a lot of people had much better things to do, they felt, than reading. And I think that they had a better memory than we do today, too, because you can still see a lot of this verbal literacy, where you'd have bards, storytellers, and they were basically the news criers of the time, where they would remember stories for decades, and word for word, essentially. They would memorize the equivalent of entire books to share with people. But in an effort to educate people without having to, without being intrusive enough to force public education, the artists working for the Catholic Church developed something called typology, and this exists in some form or another in every faith where there's sort of a visual language that goes with it. But typology specifically applies to the stained glass and the paintings that we see around churches. These are typology are basically the evidence of stories to inform people about things like morality, ethics, and social mores, as they are related specifically from scriptural texts. So we get images like the Virgin of the Rocks, or we get Saint Michael in a window, or we get saints. And we start seeing really prevalently different symbols that tell us that which saint this person is. Like, for example, you see a woman in a blue robe in a window, your first thought may be, oh, that must be Mary. Well, if she's holding a lily, then it's going to be Mary. But if she's holding a violin, then it's Saint Cecilia, who is a patron saint of music. And these are the kinds of things that people would remember, children would learn. And so you go to church not just as a religious ceremony, but also as a learning experience. The first assignment before you really delve into the rest of this week's Renaissance in Italy is just looking at two different paintings. One is immediately pre-Renaissance, and one is just a couple generations later. And you can really see the dramatic difference. Remember, we talked about how our ancestors chose to uh, show things the way they did on purpose, not because they were stupid. And we can see very much in the Renaissance that that is when people start deciding, you know what, we're going to show things the way that, not just how we think about them, but we're also going to couple that with things that appear very real, um, almost photorealistic. And this is where we start seeing that photorealism evident in paintings as a way for the artist to really show the skills that they possess. But also it helps us to appreciate the burgeoning or the growing understanding of things like physics and the geometry of light, um, the mathematics of form. We can see that in a lot of these paintings. So the first assignment is comparing two images, pre and post uh, birth of the Renaissance, and write about what you see. You know, what are the differences that you can make out? And then we dive into the Renaissance. Today, when an artist works, they try to sell their work through social media or interested parties and galleries or develop a following online. And art becomes a product that we produce to communicate and make the world beautiful, or to help make the world more beautiful. And during the Renaissance, people who had wealth, my personal idea is maybe they were a little scared they weren't going to get into heaven as quickly as they wanted to. But what they would do is use their wealth to expand their presence in a way that benefited the wider community. And so you would have a system called patronage, where wealthy family, rulers, leaders would pay an artist's livelihood and then direct them to produce work for either what the family wanted, what the leader wanted, or what the church or other organizations said that they needed. Because it was also a way of building up social importance for these wealthy rulers and families. If everybody goes to the public square and sees this gorgeous building that has just beautifully decorated, and they all know that so and so built it or so and so paid for this painting, that gives you a lot of social clout as well, and a significant amount of political power. So instead of buying paintings directly from artists, the wealthy would pay for the artist's livelihood. They would supply the homes. They would supply the material uh, and money for the artist's clothing and things like this. And then the artists would just spend their time learning about different ways to make more beautiful things. We see this in guild systems. Guilds were what we think of as trades today. So it would be masons who work with stone. It would be potters who work with clay, anything that has to do with clay. There were sub guilds in the Potters Union, in Potters Guild, that would make plumbing. They would do a lot of clay plumbing. You'd have the metallurgists. You'd have the barrel makers. Um, the the barrel makers were one of the more powerful clans or guilds, if you can believe it or not. They were the ones that produced uh, containers for people to transport goods. So the barrel makers were very important as a guild. But then you also get the Glazer Guild, the people that worked with glass. You get the detail work, the Wood Guild, the Woodcrafters Guild, who and different things like that. And again, they would work as a community, and their families would be supported by the wealthy person commissioning the work or creating the environment within which these artists could work. A much different kind of understanding or expression of economics than we're used to today. In this environment, so an influx of all sorts of different new ideas that people are trying to process. But in this environment, we have a lot of really kind of cool things that are developing. The Dome of Santa Maria del Fiore was a dome that was built in the 15th century. And it was designed by somebody named Brunelleschi. And you learn, more about this. When we look at religious structures, there is generally a rule for the semiotics of construction. If it's religious, you will have a structure that represents the limits of the physical plane, which is the blocky kind of base. And then you will have something that reflects on the infinity of the heavens, or the transcendence of heaven. And that's going to be arches or domes. And so during this time, a lot of churches up until now are built in the basilica model. I'm sorry, not basilica, excuse me. They're built on a model that was basically designed after kind of the hall, which is a large open building with a peaked roof. And domes were used specifically for a lot of smaller scale structures to kind of bring to mind that idea of heaven. But here in the Renaissance, we start seeing a growth of people that want to build bigger and bigger domes. And the reason why Brunelleschi is important is because he was an amateur. He was a guy who basically did a bunch of other stuff, and then one day essentially woke up and decided, I'm going to build a huge dome, and everybody's going to think it's amazing. And he was a polymath, and he solved a lot of really difficult issues with engineering, strength of materials, joining, mathematics, and geometry in order to create a large dome. And this kind of architecture informed Western and Christian architecture for centuries afterwards. So as we look at the developments of the Renaissance, we're going to be focusing on building a dome. Now, this is a little bit different. I usually have provided all the resources for you to do the research and everything to build something. What I want you to do on this is to look at some of the sources that we've provided, but also do your own research. Look at domes. I've provided something. I just did a 15-minute search or less on YouTube, and I found a bunch of really creative domes. The domes you can make can be smooth. They can be made with like triangle shapes that you bend together, and they could be made as geometric constructions, kind of like looking like a soccer ball, something like that. You can do a lot of different things. I'm going to mention a website that I think is a good reference for you as well. And of course, it just completely skipped my mind. The website, let's see if I can find it really quick here. Oh, it's polyhedra.net is what it is. I'm pretty sure. Let's see if that pulls it up. All right, the website is polyhedra.net. That's spelled POLYHEDRA.net. N-E-T, net. The reason why this website is important is that it shows you a lot of different shapes that you can generate into 3D models that you can use. And I'm talking about 3D models that you cut and fold paper to make, that you can use to help you in designing your own dome. And what I want you to do is after going through the module and looking at different things, kind of put yourself in that headspace of the polymath. A polymath means somebody who brings together a lot of different ideas, does a lot of different things, and tries to generate a new outcome out of that. If you remember an earlier module, we talked about slow motion multitasking, which is what you guys are really proficient at all the time anyway, because you're taking several different classes on completely different subjects, and you use those different pathways of knowledge to kind of help inform each other. And what I want you to do is kind of put that creative multitasking effort into this dome. Do research on things like geometry of domes, or the structure of domes, or what could a dome look like. And what you'll need to do is build a structure where the dome, you can't see any holes through it, and you can do it with either folded or curled paper and tape or glue. And just look at some of the examples that are in the assignment description. The like I said, the reason that we're doing this exercise as we explore the Renaissance, or particularly the Renaissance in Italy, is because that Renaissance era construction and design of domes really kind of shows how all these different things came together to provide a new environment for thought. This is where we start getting what became the sciences of optics and the health sciences as we understand them, um, chemistry as we understand it, or organic chemistry and different things like that. It wasn't towards the end of the Renaissance, it's when people started experimenting with electricity and photography, animation, all these kinds of things. If you can imagine our ancestors 400 years ago or 500 years ago creating a flipbook animation where it looked like something actually moved, that is due to the growing understanding of the universe, the human form, and geometry that came as a result of all these different ideas coming together in the excitement of the time. We get travel, we get different perspectives, we get math and geometry from the Middle East, we get ways of entertaining new thoughts that aren't our own because we want to get along with our neighbors. And but also creatives are in an environment where their livelihood is basically taken care of, and they can explore all manner of creativity as long as what they produce is artwork that is good for the well-being of the community and fits the desires of the family that is sponsoring them, essentially. Other than that, they had a lot of creativity. And we can see how this kind of spills over to a lot of the areas that the people in Europe during the Renaissance encountered as well. So that is what this week's assignment is. Go through everything. Before you ask, email me questions. Make sure you've gone through each step of the module. The module is locked until you do that first assignment, which is the initial examination of it's a written response. It's a reflection on what we're calling the crux of the Renaissance, where you see the pre-Renaissance painting and then the mid-Renaissance painting, or the early Renaissance painting. After you do that, the rest of the module will open. Before you do the assignment, look at everything, read it well, and then start doing your research, and then start playing with ideas to create your dome. Originally, I put a time limit on this, but of only like an hour. But I want you to kind of play around with different ideas, see what works, and we want to make the dome big enough that it's significant. You don't want to build a dome that's only an inch high. I'd say if you build one big enough to hide a good sized potato, that will be ideal. And if you want to go bigger, that is totally fine. And you can do as detailed as you want, but I try not to spend an awful lot of time on it. I'm thinking, let's see if my eyes aren't focused because I'm looking at what I've written down. Okay, for the dome construction, there's a couple videos to watch. And then you also need to write a little bit reflecting on the dome construction. But use your time wisely. Try not to rush. And I would say, time-wise, maybe give yourself half an hour to do the research, put it together. Maybe spend 15 minutes brainstorming. Don't make a kit. No Legos. We're only using paper. And then when you find something that you can adapt to your use to make a dome, go through everything, the planning and everything, at least twice, so you know what you're doing. And then what I would recommend is maybe 3 hours construction. If you can put the whole thing together in 15 minutes, you've kind of missed the point. But I'm thinking 1 to 3 hours is probably going to be about as much time as you should give this. And then you can paint it, decorate it, do whatever you want with it. But that's about what we're looking at. If you're going to make a dome that's out of geometry, like a soccer ball, then that time would be printing off what you needed, the pattern, cutting it out, taping or gluing it together, and then painting it or decorating it however you want to. We're not, the grade is really dependent on how well you construct it. That doesn't mean it has to be beautiful, perfect, frilly, and all that kind of stuff. But we don't want gaping holes. We don't want it to be irregular. We want it to look like it would function as a dome if it was enlarged. And you can do geodesic. You can do it after the style of Brunelleschi. But again, no kits. And we're just using paper. So if you have any questions about that, after you go through everything, go ahead and email me. And if several people email the same question, I will answer those in our next Teams meeting. So good luck on all this. We talked about the midterm. We talked about turning things in. We talked about paying attention to the assignment directions and following them. And then we talked a bit about the Renaissance. And if you want to do your own research in the Renaissance, that is absolutely amazing and great as well. Some of the products are Michelangelo and Da Vinci, of course. From Donatello is another one. Of course, I'm naming the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, but because all those names came from absolute wizards of the Renaissance as well. The woman that invented photorealistic portraiture is a product of the Renaissance as well, and you can look her up too. Quite an amazing person, and in an era when not a lot of women are renowned for their artistic abilities. So I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we will be talking again this next Tuesday, and hopefully more people will show up for the live Teams message calls. But if not, keep going and do the very best you can. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and stay safe and healthy.